The Fine Line Between Hate and Love. Chapter 1. First Impressions, Worst Impressions. Eliza Carter prided herself on two things: her sharp editorial instincts and her unshakable professionalism. Daniel Blake, however, tested both of those qualities. Ever since their publishing houses had merged 18 months ago, he had been the immovable object to her unstoppable force. Where she championed literary fiction, he pushed for commercial viability. Where she nurtured stories for their artistic merit, he prioritized marketability. They had spent months clashing over acquisitions, marketing strategies, and editorial direction, and neither of them had backed down. Now, sitting across from him in a sleek conference room, arms crossed and temper barely restrained, she realized they had been given the worst possible news. "We want both of you to co-lead the publication of Minjin Kim's debut novel." Their boss, Catherine Langford, smiled as though she were bestowing a gift rather than sentencing them to professional purgatory. "It's a high-stakes project, and you're both our best. If anyone can make this book a success, it's the two of you." Eliza flicked a glance at Daniel, expecting smug satisfaction. Instead, his expression mirrored her own restrained horror. "Catherine," Daniel said slowly, his tone all forced diplomacy, "I'm sure we can find a way to work together. But are you sure this is the best approach?" Catherine's smile didn't waver. "Absolutely. You both bring strengths to the table, and I have no doubt you'll figure it out. Now, I expect a preliminary strategy by Friday. Good luck." And with that, they were dismissed, sent off to plan a book launch, together without strangling each other first. Chapter 2. The Art of War and Publishing. For the next week, Eliza and Daniel worked in an uneasy truce. Meetings were tense but productive. Emails were clipped but professional. They met twice a week to refine their strategy. One meeting dedicated to editorial development, the other to marketing and positioning. Eliza had to admit, grudgingly, that Daniel was not incompetent. He had a keen sense of reader trends, and his ideas, while frustratingly commercial, were backed by solid data. When he proposed giving Minjun input on the cover design, a rare privilege for a debut author, she found herself nodding in agreement. When she suggested an editorial-focused campaign highlighting Minjun's lyrical prose, he built on it rather than dismissing it. It was disorienting, working with him instead of against him. One evening, after a particularly intense discussion about title options, Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're good at this." Eliza blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "You have a way of seeing the heart of a book, not just its surface appeal. It's frustrating as hell, but it's also impressive." She stared at him, unsure if this was an insult disguised as a compliment or an actual admission of respect. "Thanks," she said slowly. "You're not completely terrible, either." His lips twitched, but he didn't push. Instead, they got back to work, the undercurrent of tension between them shifting into something more complicated. Chapter 3. Lines blur in the rain. Weeks passed, and their collaboration became less of a battle and more of a dance. Their meetings expanded into coffee breaks, impromptu discussions in each other's offices, and even a Saturday session at a bookstore cafe when the workweek proved insufficient. One night, after working late on the final marketing plan, Daniel stretched, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's after 7. Want to grab dinner?" Eliza hesitated. Their relationship had remained strictly professional, and crossing into social territory felt dangerous. But then she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the way the tension in his shoulders hadn't quite eased. Okay, she found herself saying, just an hour. The restaurant was cozy, the warm glow of hanging lights softening the sharp lines of Daniel's face. Their conversation drifted from publishing to personal histories. How Eliza's grandfather had been a small press publisher, how Daniel had started in a tiny independent house before working his way up. How did we work in the same building for over a year and never talk like this? She mused. Daniel smirked. Probably because we decided we were enemies before we ever really talked to each other. She opened her mouth to argue, but paused. He wasn't wrong. Maybe. As they left, sharing an umbrella against the rain, something shifted between them. When he looked down at her, eyes searching, her pulse quickened. And for the first time, she wondered what would happen if she stopped seeing him as an adversary and started seeing him as something else. Chapter 4. Crossing the Line. The night before Minjun's book launch, they worked late, finalizing last-minute details. The air between them felt charged, anticipation mingling with something unspoken. At some point, Eliza looked up to find Daniel watching her. Not in irritation or exasperation, but with something softer, something that made her stomach tighten. You really care about this book, he said quietly. She swallowed. Of course I do. He stepped closer. He hesitated. That's what I admire about you. Eliza's breath caught. They were standing too close, the room suddenly too quiet. Her heart pounded as Daniel reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. This is a bad idea, she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she meant crossing this line or ignoring it. Daniel exhaled a quiet laugh. Probably. But he didn't step back. Neither did she. And then, before she could think better of it, she leaned in. His lips met hers in a slow, hesitant kiss that quickly deepened. It was equal parts surprise and inevitability. Months of tension unraveling in a single moment. When they finally pulled away, breathless, Daniel let his forehead rest against hers. We're going to be a nightmare to work with now, aren't we? Eliza laughed softly. Probably. But as they stood there, tangled between past rivalry and present possibility, she found that she didn't mind at all.